We spoke to a security expert who says that kind of protection is a good idea, but should not be the sole security plan. Mark Quimby says helping provide true response times before a shooting can even help more.
Shots fired. People are running out of the business.
A security guard helped evacuate more than 100 people.
An alert security officer is being hailed as a hero for thwarting an apparent shooting plot.
Welcome, everybody, to the Thin Yellow Line podcast. I'm Mike Hefner, your host, joined with Mark Quimby.
How's it going?
Pretty good.
All right.
This is our first of hopefully many podcasts. Welcome. What are we talking about today, Mark?
A few things. We're going to talk about and hopefully interview the most recent Officer of the Quarter, which I believe her name, according to Google, is Paige Kuhn.
He probably messed that up, so apologies.
Yeah, I also have a name like that. Of Nashville, Tennessee. We're going to talk about some stuff that's in the news, some unfortunate things in the news, a couple of active shooter situations that have happened, and we'll discuss a little bit of the philosophy of what maybe you could do if you find yourself in a situation like that, and some of the training that we offer at Security Engineers, sort of directed at active shooters and workplace violence, and then whatever else we think of as we go along.
Well, and I thought we were going to talk about why this podcast. Wasn't that on the agenda?
It is. That's
all right.
yours.
All right. Well, I guess we'll start out with that. As we think about the importance of the security profession, in particular physical security, cyber. If you look into cyber, there's no shortage of podcasts and shows and dialogue on the topic, but not so much in the physical security world. And the reality is there are countless men and women out there on the front lines that are protecting people, protecting assets, just selflessly serving our communities. And we want to talk about that. We want to talk about celebrate the successes and talk about best practices in use and the evolution of the industry and the people that make it happen. And I think there's a void there, and we're hopeful to be able to share a little bit of those stories and increase the volume of that voice. And so it's an ambitious project, I think.
It's sort of fascinating to me that there isn't more out there about physical security. Last time I checked the numbers, which was probably 2017, 2018, there's 600,000 sworn law enforcement officers in the United States and 1.3 million licensed or active working security professionals. So there's twice as many security professionals in the United States on duty than even sworn law enforcement, but you hardly ever hear anything about them. There's certainly not a lot of information out there for those who are looking to digest or to increase their knowledge base. So I think it's a good thing that we're jumping into this, and we're going to have an email address, request@thinyellowlinepodcast.com. So we certainly want to speak to the things that you're interested in listening about as it relates to security. So feel free to shoot an email. Once again, request@thinyellowlinepodcast.com.
That's request with an S.
Yes, request with an S. I'm
Excellent.
from Mississippi, so. In keeping with our culture at Security Engineers, we have the longest email addresses possible, so we're sticking with
Excellent. All right. Well, just to conclude the philosophy of why are we trying to do this, as far as backgrounds go, as I mentioned, I'm Mike Hefner. In my day job, when I'm not podcasting, I'm the CEO of Security Engineers, which is a fantastic company, and I've forced them to sponsor the pod, if you will. But we'll try to keep that as an aside, because we definitely want to make the podcast security company agnostic and really focus on the industry at large. But certainly we'll be coming to you live mostly from Birmingham, Alabama, the home of Security Engineers.
Right, yeah, and I'm once again Mark Quimby. I'm the Senior Security Consultant here. I've been in the security industry for 13 years, coming out of the Marine Corps in 2006, and started as a frontline security officer and worked my way up through management up to what we consider our Field Support Center, which is a corporate office, and sort of had the opportunity to see the industry at many different levels, from frontline to management. So hopefully I can bring a unique perspective to the podcast coming from that kind of background. And most of my time spent in training and now in mostly outside sales and consulting.
And I did not mention, but this Army Ranger will crack a few Marine jokes at Mark's expense. So I apologize to the many Marines out there, because Mark fits all the stereotypes, as you'll
Indeed.
come to know.
Indeed.
All right. So that's philosophy. So I guess that takes us now into our first topic and our first guest to the pod. And how do we say it again?
Paige Kuhn or Kuhn, one of the two. I'm sure I'm butchering
Right.
it.
Well, we'll get her on the line and she can tell us firsthand.
Roger.
All right. We got the technical details sorted out. On the line with us. And we have officer, and then we've had some back and forth on this page. How do we say your last name? Is it Kuhn?
It's Cooney.
Cooney. We neither one of us were
We're
right.
both- We're both wrong. All right. Well, we certainly appreciate you joining us on this inaugural first podcast for the Thin Yellow Line. We've had a good session thus far, but really this is at the focus of our podcast is we are really trying to put as much emphasis and a voice to our security officers, or all security officers that are out there each and every day, that are on post night and day, protecting their respective clients and doing fine work, usually without much notoriety or much fanfare, and only when things go awry or when there's issues or high profile events. And as you know, that's a small fraction of really what goes on. So we're super excited that you joined us, and congratulations, before we get too far into it, on your recognition as the Officer of the Quarter for Security Engineers. Well done.
Thank you.
Well, so in return for your success, we're putting you through the paces here. I just wanted to kind of pick your brain and understand some things about what it took to get to Officer of the Quarter. And so we'll just start out with, if you would, tell us, how did you get into the security profession?
Well, it actually started in Lincoln, Alabama. I was working at a 24-hour restaurant close to one of your posts you have down there, and got to meet a lot of the officers that came in and out, and a lot of the clientele employees. And I asked a lot of questions about the people in the SEI uniforms, and I got a lot of positive feedback. So whenever I got the chance, I did apply, and that was my first post that I worked.
Awesome. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you've now actually moved states with us, correct? You're up in Tennessee now?
Yes, I have.
How did that work, going from office to office and staying with the company?
Well, since Tennessee operates somewhat independently, I did have to go through and redo all the paperwork, but it was a pretty smooth transfer as far as moving from down there in Lincoln up to Nashville. I now work in Smyrna.
What is your current post assignment? Can you give us an overview without obviously naming the client, but what are your current duties?
My current post is access control. I work the main gate, so my job is to check for ID badges, make sure that it's clientele employees that are coming in. I get to redirect traffic that needs to go to a different location on site, or I have a lot of civilians that will pull up to the gate asking for applications, and I hand those out so that no one is on site that's not supposed to be there.
Awesome. Now how often do you encounter exceptions or things that are going that where your intervention is required? Is that an hourly occurrence, daily occurrence? Do you find it varies from day to day?
It does vary from day to day. I have busier hours during my day where there's more employees that are coming in and out. Currently, with the access gates are down, so I'm a lot busier at the moment because of technical difficulties. But yeah, I would say it does vary from day to day, but I stay pretty busy.
If there was a category of individual that gives you the most difficulty, is there a certain category? You know, as the last post that I was on was at the Regions Tradition Golf Tournament, and I gotta admit, the biggest there was two categories of individuals that were the most problematic, and the first were the caddies, so they felt like they owned the place and went wherever they wanted. And then the second were the tournaments held out at Greystone. And no offense to any Greystone folks, but the second most problematic group were the Greystone members or residents. And they certainly...
They're not used to giving up ownership of their property.
Yeah, so I was just curious, do you find that you encounter any of that where there's maybe employees or contractors or something that give you a hard time?
It's typically the drivers that are at the wrong entrance. So that would be contractors or truck drivers that are not supposed to come through that gate, that would have difficulty turning around into the road to get to the separate entrance that they have to go into. And right now the other one would be employees that, being that the gate is down, they're used to scanning their badge and being able to go in, and having to stop and talk to me is not their favorite part of the day.
Right. Because they're probably running late.
Right.
All right. Well, we got a couple other questions we're going to float by you just to kind of get an idea of where you stand on all this. And the next one is what about the industry, the security industry, has sort of surprised you? I'm not sure what your background is prior to working in security, but what about the industry has surprised you now that you've kind of worked your way well into it?
Well, I think a common misconception was that you don't have to deal with people, and that is not true at all. I'm pretty interactive with the public on a regular basis. I guess I thought more that it was somewhat removed, that you kind of just stood and watched people, and that's not true. You talk a lot.
Would you say that you were surprised that there's as much customer service involved as there is?
Yes.
Oftentimes when we're hiring people, we're looking for people that have a very strong customer service background because there is so much customer service involved. That was one of the things that surprised me about the security industry. What about your favorite part of the security profession? What is it about what you do on a daily basis that you find most rewarding or enjoy the most?
I find it's a pretty exciting job. There's never a dull moment. It's constantly evolving because, like right now, I'm dealing with a technical difficulty where the gates are down and I have to do everything manually, or there are incidences that come up and having to do reports on those. New sites, working different sites, having to learn a whole new post, or meeting new people, be it at the site that I work, people that are just coming in and out, or working different posts, having to work with different people, learning to work with that person that's usually there, that has their routine. And it's pretty, there's not a whole lot of consistency, I guess you could say.
Right.
Yeah, that's variety is, as they say, spice of life.
It is.
So that's good. If you look at the industry at large, or what you've seen thus far, what have you identified any improvements or things that you think should be done better, either by ourselves as professionals or clients? Anything that you've focused on?
I think one that kind of goes both ways for clients and for us is communication, keeping post orders up to date. I know it's kind of difficult because it's constantly changing, but keeping that flow of information between officers, between the one that's being relieved and the one that's taking on the shift, between officers and management, and with clients, I think communication is always something to be improved on.
We just recently had a big event where we pulled a lot of key personnel from the field across our footprint, from all our various states and branches in, and broke down some different sessions, and communication was the hot topic in every group, both internally and externally. It's sort of the fuel that keeps this whole machine running. So it's no surprise that would be something that you point out. And certainly as a company and as professionals, we kind of have to be the bigger people and drive the communication. And sometimes that requires us to educate the client on why it's important. And certainly that's something that we're focused on here at the Field Support Center. What would you say has been the key to your success? We know from talking to the regional manager over your area that you've kind of climbed up the chain of command fairly rapidly and have been very successful in the profession. What do you think that has helped you facilitate that growth?
I would say being ready and available and being open to learning and taking criticisms, because I haven't had a security background when I started with this company. So learning from all the people that were around me, how they do things, kind of finding my own way in that. And then as moving up the ladder, having to talk to people further up the ladder to learn better how to do per se management. Being a site supervisor was definitely something I haven't done before. So definitely being willing to learn and evolve is an important skill.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice. I started out my professional career as a junior military officer, a lieutenant in the Army, and probably the best piece of advice that I ever got was shut up and listen. And I reported my first duty station. I had a platoon sergeant that had been there 24 years, and squad leaders that had been there 10 plus years. And so being able to listen to them and get input and then apply it to what I bring to the table, I think is hugely important to anyone in almost every situation. So not surprised to hear you say that, and that's certainly fantastic. Well, hey, on behalf of the Thin Yellow Line podcast, you're our very first guest. We certainly want to congratulate you on your accolades and accomplishment during the day job, and certainly want to thank you for participating in the session. It's been informative and certainly been right on the mark for what we hope to accomplish here is highlighting the great work that's being done out in the field. So thank you very much, Paige.
Thank you guys for letting me participate.
We've enjoyed it.
All right. Take care, Paige.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, fantastic. Thank you, Paige. Really enjoyed having you on the pod. Mark, what's up next?
Kind of want to bring up some of the stuff that's been in the news recently, and it's unfortunately it's not good news. As most of you know, we're looking at August 6th now. Just recently, we've had a couple of active shooter situations, and it feels like every few months these things are in the news. If you look at it statistically, it's still a very, very low risk in terms of likelihood. In the same amount of time that I think 45 people were lost in these two active shooter situations, 350 were lost and car wrecks. So it's certainly not the most dangerous threat that we face. I think butter probably kills more people than active shooter situations, and it's not even close. But it is something that's in the news, and it's because it stirs up a lot of emotion. It's a scary thing. It's a helpless feeling a lot of times for people, and because of where we occupy space as professionals, when one of these things happens, I typically get lots of messages through social media, email, text messages, and everybody has the same question. Well, what do you think about this situation? What could have been done? How do we prevent these things? And really, there's a wide array of motives, and there's a wide array of methodologies for how these active shooters or mass casualty events happen. I mean, we've even seen situations where people get in a vehicle and they drive through a crowd of people on the sidewalk. But specific to active shooters, really the motives, we won't dig into that today. I mean, because I want to keep this apolitical. So let's talk about the practical things that we can do. And certainly we teach a lot of active shooter classes, workplace violence classes. That's something that's part of my job, and I take very seriously. I'm passionate about it. And there's really only 3 tangible things that we can do. And it seems hackneyed and trite, but it's the truth. And it goes back to the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, run, hide, fight system. Those are your tangible options if you find yourself in an environment where somebody's firing a weapon into a crowd of people, or discriminately attacking people to maim and kill them. Really, all you can do is run. You can hide, or you can fight. And I think when we teach the classes to our client base, or to whoever, our officers or whoever's requested this information, we sort of add a 4th step. It's really part of the first step, the run piece, but I think it's important to take a step back, at least philosophically, before these incidents happen, and realize that you have to figure out what the best option is of those 3: run, hide, fight. And these should happen chronologically if possible. You want to run if you can, if at all possible, if you know where the shooter is, or you have an open access to egress and escape. That is the best option. If I'm in an environment where somebody's maiming and killing, I don't want to be in that environment. So right. Escape is the best option. But we need to figure out if that is the best option before we just take off running like a chicken with their head cut off into a crowd, and where we might be running towards the threat or whatever. So when we teach it, we typically say figure out, get out, hide out, take out. And it's our take on the run, hide, fight piece.
Yeah, we're talking, as far as timeliness, we're talking about the Dayton, and we're talking about El Paso Walmart incidents happened this past weekend. And you certainly want to emphasize and encourage and for everyone that as you walk, how many people are going into Walmart and thinking about their escape plan and thinking about what route would they take, and having that security mindset is obviously critically important, but you're realistic about how many people are doing that, and even with the frequency and the publicity around the events and the awareness, I think the education is certainly an important part of what we do each and every day is the education piece. As a security officer, that you're really that consultant and that advisor and helping get that mindset shifted, if you will.
Well, certainly it's incumbent upon us as security professionals to make sure that we're maintaining that mindset on duty and not becoming complacent. In the Marine Corps, we had a phrase, complacency kills, and it may sound a little grandiose for what we do day in and day out, but certainly I think it's an important principle to bear in mind that complacency kills your professionalism, it kills the quality of your service as an officer, but it also can be literally something that relates directly to your mortality if one of these situations were to happen. And I'm sure you're the same way. Anywhere I go, I see people with their faces in their cell phone, especially like at the checkout. Mentioned Walmart, grocery stores. It's like as soon as the debit card is swiped, back in a purse, back in a wallet, they're grabbing their phone and they're 50 miles deep into Facebook or Twitter instead of being physically present the same place that they are mentally present. And so it's really important for us, like you mentioned, as those security professionals, the duty experts in these various environments, that we're fostering a culture of awareness. And it's not about being paranoid. It's not about being afraid. It's not about thinking that the world is out to get you all the time, or that everywhere you go, there's going to be an active shooter situation, because once again, statistically, it's very unlikely to happen. But if it does, the risk that it brings to bear is incredibly high, as we well know. So it's important when you're in these environments to keep these security mindsets, not just at duty, but take that with you in your personal life and pass it on to your friends and family, to be cognizant of what's going on around you. When I've got a master's degree in Homeland Security, or I have a bachelor's in Homeland Security and master's in criminal justice, advanced counterterrorism, and through those 2 degree programs did countless research papers on terrorist events and active shooter mass casualty events. And one of the things that was really interesting that I discovered in studying 9/11 was that hundreds and hundreds of people died in that event that didn't have to, based on when the towers fell, but they died because they went to an escape route that they were used to taking in their daily life. So they would run past 3 escapes trying to get to the place that they would get out of the building for lunch or on break or at the end of the day. And so it's human nature to snap into our habits, especially under sympathetic stress, that flight or fight stress that every human being is going to kick in to if there is an active shooter situation. And we go to what we do without thinking. And if we aren't forcing ourselves in our day-to-day lives to be aware of additional exit plans, and not just coming into Walmart and so we assume we're going to leave the right way. I mean, how many people, and I don't want to suppose, what people's actions were when I wasn't there, but I would assume, just based on what I understand about human nature, that the people that were trying to get out of Walmart were likely trying to get out the same way they came in, and probably never even paid attention to the various fire escapes and those other kind of exit strategies in the back of the building or adjacent walls. So, before sympathetic stress sets in, before you find yourself in the middle of an active shooter situation, you should already be aware of kind of your environment. What's going on around you? Does anyone or anything kind of step outside the bounds of normalcy, and have an idea of what you would do in the event that it did happen?
Yeah, so much work to be done in this area with companies, and as you said, we're not really speculating at this point on what ifs, and we don't certainly have the facts, but and I don't think we know if a security officer was for instance, at the Walmart, but part of the pod had there been a security officer there, is I've heard this lunatic that did this heinous act got hungry, and that's why he went to Walmart. Now, if the security officer's out front and is being alert and paying attention to who's entering, you got to believe that this guy goes somewhere else, and therefore this incident doesn't happen. It doesn't happen there, and then the work of that security officer it never gets noted, although it potentially had saved countless lives as the deterrent to making that location the soft target. It hardens it somewhat, and the attentiveness of the officer can go, because obviously run, hide, fight is after a round is downrange, and
right.
And if at that point it's really a bad situation, there's nothing positive coming at that point forward. And the profession, so much of what the security professionals do out there is that deterrent factor, and then therefore it causes them to go unnoticed. So hopefully we can continue throughout these sessions to reinforce those activities that take place each and every day, and people don't even think about.
Right, and when I was the director of training, one thing I told our officers all the time is you'll never know how many of these situations you prevented. There's no way to put that on a spreadsheet. And now that I'm dealing with outside sales and I'm talking to potential clients and I'm trying to get them to invest in, enhance security programs or do active shooter workplace violence training, it's so hard sometimes in a culture where everybody's so budget minded to get them to spend money or time on these things, because it's hard, once again, to put the things that never happen on a spreadsheet. It's hard to quantify what doesn't happen. But we have had situations even within our own company. where retroactively we realized that the attentiveness of an officer played a massive part in prevention. We at one of our banks, we had an officer some years ago, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago. Law enforcement shows up with some people from a credit union across the street and saying, "Hey, we want you to review your cameras and see if you can find this guy." And they bring a printed out picture from their security cameras across the street, and sure enough, this is a person who had came into our facility, secured by our officer, and he had come in the facility, gone to the island in the middle of the bank, wrote, "I'm going to shoot everybody if you don't give me the money" note on that bank's deposit slip. Looks up, and he's got a professional, squared away security officer staring him right in the eyes, and then with good customer service, "Hey, how are you doing today?" But letting the guy know, hey, his body language is a little strange. Let him know that I'm watching you through the context of customer service in a squared away uniform. And all of a sudden, this becomes a very hard target. The guy takes the deposit slip, goes across the street, and arm robs the credit union that didn't have that security officer there. And we'll never know what would have happened had that security officer been unprofessional in his appearance, not made eye contact, not done the customer service kind of conduit of security through the lens of customer service with this guy. We'll never know, but we know that he didn't rob our facility secured by our officer because of that hardened target. So that's one of the thankless parts of this industry, and one of the things I hope that we can do with this podcast is draw attention to the successes of the officers out there, not just our own, but in the industry at large, because there are times where things would go much worse if it wasn't for the actions of a squared away professional security officer. And sometimes those actions aren't grandiose. You don't have to be jumping through the window from a helicopter like the SWAT team. And sometimes it's just ironing your shirt in the morning and making eye contact and showing that you're vigilant, that you have a security mindset, and you're aware of what's going on around you and prepared to respond if the need arises.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Well, that's our news update. We would, again, like to thank our Officer of the Quarter, Paige Kuhn, for joining us during the pod. We want to encourage our listeners to use the request email at requests@thinyellowlinepodcast.com to submit your topics that you would like us to cover and talk about. And we look forward to having you back next week.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks for tuning in to the Thin Yellow Line podcast, your source for physical security tips, news, and focus on the men and women of the security profession. You can find the pod on your favorite hosting platform and a video version on YouTube. Just search Thin Yellow Line podcast. See you next time.